Hi, everyone, and welcome to the second talk about threshold signature schemes. Rosario, please.
Okay, so we stopped after we constructed threshold BLS and Schnorr signatures. We talked about how to deal with proof by simulations and what that meant in terms of the properties that we need for the distributed key generation, which is also used to generate nonces in the Schnorr signature scheme. So what about DSA? So DSA is the digital signature standard and is a very interesting twist on the Schnorr signature scheme. Again, for those of you who are not familiar with it, the main idea is that the nonce that you choose is inverted. G is raised not to K, but to K minus 1, K to the minus 1 mod Q. And then the equation is somewhat different. It takes the nonce and it multiplies it by this M plus XR, where M is the hash of the message, little r is the hash of the group nonce, and those are numbered in CQ. And the signature is R and S. Actually, the signature could even send little r as part of the message, and what you check is the following. Okay, so let me show you the difference in more detail between DSA and Schnorr. The nonce is inverted, and here the computation of S requires just a linear combination of shared secret, K and X. Here, however, the secrets are multiplied, K and X, you see they're multiplied. So that's gonna, in this inversion, those are both quadratic operations, as we will see in a minute, and they'll introduce quite a bit of complication in how we do threshold DSS. So let's start with the robust version. So let's assume more than honest majority, at least. We'll see that we need more than that. And let's see how we can do the robust threshold DSA. So for DKG, we're going to do the joint Pedersen DKG that we discussed before. Now, for the nonce, here's what we're going to do. Instead of performing one joint Pedersen to get K, because we need to do this inversion operation, we are going to do two of them. And let's call K and A the values that are generated by these two joint Pedersen. But we'll do a slight modification. Only for A, we do the Feldman phase, okay? For K, we don't. There's just a sharing of K information theoretically, and that's it, okay? And then the players reconstruct the value B, which is the product of K and A in the clear by broadcasting the product share. If you multiply your shares together, those are going to be on a polynomial of degree 2t, which has a free term Ka. So you can do that assuming you have enough good share. Okay, and it requires also randomization with a zero polynomial degree 2t because this polynomial that interpolates B is not a random polynomial, but is a, it can be factored into polynomial degree t. But anyway, those are standard MPC kind of tools. So now that you have B in the clear, you're going to compute the inverse of B modulo Q, and this will give you R by simply taking C, which is the inverse of B modulo Q, and raising A to that. And you see the inverse of A is going to cancel with A, and you're going to be left with the inverse of K. Okay? So this is a way to compute inversion with one round and one multiplication, which, so you obtain G to the inverse of K and the sharing of K from the Pedersen DSS that you did at the beginning. Just a slightly embarrassing thing. When I was a graduate student, I thought I invented this trick, and then I found out that it actually had appeared already in a paper by Barlan and Bieber a few years before. But it's a very neat trick. It sort of allows you to compress an inversion circuit into a single multiplication. So, okay, so this is how we end up with the nonce, a R G to the inverse of K public and a sharing of K. And now once we have that, we do that again for this trick of the polynomial degree 2t. We do it again to compute the S values. Now, every player broadcasts this share right here, which again interpolates to S, but on a polynomial of degree 2t. And again, you want to randomize this polynomial of degree 2t with a zero polynomial of degree 2t to make sure that the polynomial is random and no other information is leaked. And now you have this. So first of all, because you need to interpolate a polynomial of degree 2t, and in this particular protocol, we're not doing any complicated degree reduction step, you need to have at least 2t plus 1 good players, right? So already our fault tolerance has gone down. Now we need 3t. The total number of players has to be at least 3t plus 1, because you need at least 2t plus 1 to interpolate this polynomial with 2t. And then we need to talk about how we get rid of bad shares. Well, one thing would be to use error correction codes, because we need to only weed out bad shares out of this SI. And if we use error correction codes, as I told you before, now we need to add an extra T good players to compensate for the T bad players. And so this will give you a fault tolerance of 4T plus 1. So you need, you can only tolerate roughly a quarter of bad players. The other option is that when you publish SI, you somehow publish some sort of proof of correctness with respect to all the zero knowledge proof of correctness with respect to all the public values generated by the PSSs. And in this case, you can do with 3t plus 1, but it requires all these other additional zero knowledge proofs of correctness. Okay, so this is how we do threshold DSA, but it requires 3t plus 1 or 4t plus 1. Okay, so what about dishonest majority with abort? So dishonest majority with abort, so somehow this is actually, the reference was in the previous slide. This was actually part of my PhD thesis. So we're talking about like literally 25 years ago, like really old. Then this DSS thing sort of, let me give you a little bit of context. When I was a graduate student, we thought that these things were going to be important for certification authorities, how to sort of protect keys that were used to issue internet certificate, web certificates. Those for us was like the main application. I remember when I gave this talk at Eurocrypt, that I was approached by military scientists who told me they were looking at something like this for the control of nuclear codes. Which I found, and I remember at that time that I immediately sent them my CD as a hire me, and they wrote back that because I wasn't a citizen, I couldn't get a job with them. And then this thing sort of lied dormant for a while until, guess what? Cryptocurrencies started using DSS as the main signature scheme. And all of a sudden, the custodial of wallets private keys became a very, very hot, important issue. And this topic of threshold DSS came back into the fore, and particularly the setting of dishonest majority with abort that we had not really sort of examined back then sort of became important. So what if we want to do threshold DSA with dishonest majority with a ball? Let me take a little, if what I told you before is not prehistoric enough, let me go even a farther back in history to how do we multiply? Remember that is decision multiplication, right? So let's assume now that our secrets are shared additively, n out of n, okay? So n players have added shares of A and B. And we want to get shares of their multiplication A and B. So notice that C can be written as the cross products of the sum of all the cross products, right? By the distributed property. So if two parties, I and J, could turn the product of AI Bj into two values, Dij, Eij, such that the sum of Dij, Eij is the product of AI and Bj, then we would be done. Why? Because the player could set a local share to what? The cross product of the two values that he knows, then all the values that he receives when he does this product when owning A, and all the values that he receives when doing this protocol when he contributes Bj. And when you sum all these guys together and you set Ci to that value, then it would be that C is the sum of all the Ci's. And this is, my God, this goes back to the first MPC paper by Goldreich, Mikhail, and Pedersen. So, great. So how do we do this protocol that turns multiplicative shares into additive? So now let's forget about n players. Let's look at two particular players. So two particular players, Alice and Bob, they share secrets A and B. Alice has A, Bob has B, and they want to turn them into secrets D and E, such that D plus C is equal to A times B modulo Q. Here I'm going to show you a protocol that uses an additively homomorphic encryption scheme. And let's assume for a moment that this additively homomorphic encryption scheme has as message space ZQ, and the homomorphism works over ZQ, okay? So for those of you who don't know what additively homomorphic means that if I have two ciphertexts and I multiply them, I'm going to add the respective plain text. And here's how the protocol works. Alice encrypts her share with an encryption scheme, which is additively homomorphic, and she knows the decryption key, okay? And she sends it to Bob. Bob uses the homomorphism first to multiply A times B, which you can do multiplication by a known constant because it's basically adding B times the A, and then you subtract a random value E. Remember, all of this is mod Q, okay? And then E is going to be Bob's share, it's random, and Alice's share is going to be D, the decryption of this value B. Notice that if you take D and E and you sum them together, the E cancels and you get AB. Okay, any questions so far?
No new questions.
So this is something that goes back to this paper by Gilboa on something Mobilia related, but it's about two-party RSA generation, so which we'll probably cover tomorrow. So here we have this MTA, I call it an MTA protocol that stands for multiplicative to additive. So reality is we don't know, and actually we do know, of a candidate encryption scheme that works modulo Q, but the most common one is Payet. Payet is an encryption scheme. So in our case, what is Q? Q is going to be determined by the DSA parameter. Q is going to be the group, the order of the group where we do DSA. So an encryption E that works over an arbitrary, so I fix Q, I could create an encryption scheme that works with message space ZQ and a homomorphism over ZQ uses assumptions over new, this is actually pretty new assumptions over class groups. They're fairly inefficient, but you could use them. What about using Payet? Payet, the problem with Payet is that the homomorphism is over Zn, where n is an RSA modulus. So, let me see, right. So what we want to do is that we want to prevent that when we do this computation, you end up introducing a reduction mod n. Because if you do a reduction mod n, your math is not going to work anymore, right? It's not going to be true anymore that d plus e is going to be equal to ab modulo q if during this operation a reduction mod n happens. So what are you going to do? You're going to add zero knowledge proofs that this value a and this value b and this value e are all small enough to prevent a reduction from happening. Now, and I speak from experience here because I recently had to fix a paper of mine where I made this mistake, that the reason this is important is not just for correctness. It's not important that the reduction mod n doesn't happen because otherwise the output of the protocol is wrong. But it's also important for privacy, for secrecy. Why? Because if Bob chooses B or E big enough to force a reduction mod n, this reduction mod n would maybe, he could do it in a way that the reduction mod n happens depending on what the value of A is. So think of it, he chooses n in some way that the top significant bit is 0, and but the other ones are all 1s. And so if the top significant bit of A is 1, the reduction happens, otherwise it doesn't happen. And when you're going to use this thing inside the DSA protocol, the failure of this protocol is going to yield a failure of the signature to verify. So Bob is actually going to know that his attempt to a reduction mod n happened, and it's going to give Bob a bit or 2 bits or some bits of information about the secret held by Alice, which in turn is going to be an information leakage that could break the security of the distributed protocol. The reason I say that this, I know for experience, is that in my paper, unfortunately, we put a proof that B was small, but somehow we omitted a proof that E was small. And that actually, it didn't turn, there was, you'll see later what the protocol is, there was no attack, but the proof was actually flawed because it assumed that there was no reduction mod n here, and actually Bob could cause the reduction mod n to happen. So, yeah, owning up to my mistakes, I guess. And this idea of using Payet with the range proofs originated in this paper by Mackenzie and Ryder, which was the first paper to look at the dishonest majority case specifically for the two-party case, which is in answer to one of the questions that we had before. Okay, so now we're ready to talk about the threshold DSA with a board. So the DKG, we do the committed Pedersen DKG that I showed you before. And now, and everybody ends with a share of X in this TN Schnorr scheme. Now, when we're going to move into signing, we assume that T+1 players will get together and wants to sign. We don't think that all N players want to sign. So we say T+1 players get together, let's sign. What if there's lots of adversary players, or even one adversary player there? Then it will abort. Okay, so that's where. If we're going to use this, then think of now mapping this Shamir shares of X into additive share of X by scaling them with the proper Lagrangian coefficient. So if I know the subset of players who are getting together, I take my Shamir share, I multiply it by the appropriate Lagrangian coefficient determined by the set, and I'm going to have an additive share. So when we start the signature, and this is a paper from last year, CCS, well, 2 years ago, CCS. So when we start the DSA, and I'm giving you a simplified version, remember that we're starting with an additive share of X, and the players perform two additive sharings of values K and A. And this is the same trick that we did before to get the inverse. So now, the values, we published the value G to the AI, but we don't publish anything about the K. And now we do two MTA protocols. Why two? Because we need a share, additive shares of B and additive shares of Z, where B is Ka and Z is Kx. Why do we need Ka? Because once we have Ka, we invert B and we compute R with the same Barillon-Beaver trick that we showed before, given these public commitments to the AI that are generated as part of the problem. Okay, so this is how you compute the nonce. And then once we have the shares of ZI, you have additive shares of SI, and this is how you interpolate S. Okay, any questions? And that's why we need to do it.
Yes, we have a question on the Payet slide 39. So the question says, since A times B minus E cannot wrap around Q because N is too large, doesn't that harm the privacy of the share of Alice?
It doesn't wrap around N. So this is a very good question. I'm sort of overlooking a lot of issues here. So A and B are small, right? So now you want to make sure that, so what you're going to do, you're going to choose this mask E bigger than A and B. So in particular, so if you prove that A is somehow less than Q, and if you prove that B is less than Q, you want to choose E to be in a range between 0 and Q to the 3, okay? So that is going to make everything, so the privacy of A is preserved by the encryption, okay? Is the privacy of B that you want to make sure that is preserved by this mask. And this mask, you want to make it statistically larger than A and B. So, and then this addition happens over the integers because there is no reduction mod N, right? But it is over the integers, but because E is so big, A and B gets lost in the noise of the randomness of E. I hope that answered the question.
Okay, no other questions.
Right. Let me tell you that in reality, what's happening is that you choose A less than Q, right? But the zero knowledge proof add some slack there, and the zero knowledge proof can only prove that A is less than Q, which then forces you to choose E in the Q to the 5 range, which then forces you to make sure that your N is bigger than Q to the 7. Once you do that, so those are all important parameters, which luckily work fine for current security parameters of DSA and RSA, because RSA is 2048 bits, DSA is 256, so we're fine on that front. Notice that when we mistakenly omitted this proof of E, this leakage that came out from this protocol would actually yield an attack if the modulus N was chosen very small. And in fact, this is recent. This was published maybe 3 months ago. Omer Shromovitz and somebody else, I don't remember their name right now, show that you could use this leakage when n is very small, and they actually used to attack implementations where the size of n wasn't checked as part of the implementation. So it's very important when you implement this stuff that you check, first of all, that you design the protocol well, which I obviously didn't do in this particular case, but also that all the parameters that are specified as part of the protocol are actually enforced in the implementation. We did say in our paper that n had to be chosen bigger than q to the 7, but some implementation forgot to check that, and that would actually create an attack. So hopefully that answered the question. Okay, so we were here, and we do the signature part by doing this 2 MTA and making sure that one MTA is to compute the inverse and one MTA is to interpolate S. Why do I say that this is a simplified version? Because the protocol aborts if the signature is not correct. So this allows us to avoid several checks throughout the protocol that the players are doing the right thing. So you do need to make sure in this MTA protocols that you do the zero knowledge proof that things are small, but somehow we don't do many other checks, saying, oh, if the adversary is going to input one K here and a different K here in these 2 MTAs, things are going to fall apart, but the signature is not going to verify. Well, we want to make sure that the protocol reveals no information even when you abort, so that the abort is not dependent on the values held by the good players, right? That's one of the reasons why we put those range proofs in the MTA. And the other is that we want to make sure that the values between the MTA protocols are all consistent. And this, you do that by checking in the exponent before you actually recover S. Okay? So this are, I'm not going to get into the detail of that, but you can go look at the paper. But these are, it's a series of protocols that have come up, and in fact, I have them right here. So let me know if there are any questions here.
No questions.
So, and this is a series of, as I say, this has become again a very area of research due to the interest from custodial cryptocurrencies. And so let me give you some more references on threshold DSA. Similar techniques to the ones that I described above appear in a paper by Lindell and Knopf. You can use an MTA protocol which is based on oblivious transfer instead of being based on additively homomorphic encryption. And this as the advantage that it avoids introducing additional assumptions, because you can do an oblivious transfer protocol based on Discrete log, and so you're staying inside the realm of assumptions that underlie DSA, but the drawback is that you have to do this bit-by-bit operations to do the oblivious transfer. So it loses on that efficiency point. You can use class groups in the MTA protocol, which would, get rid of this headaches of the range proofs, which they're not too bad, but they are the most computationally intensive part of the protocol. But unfortunately, the cost of working in this class groups would overshadow the efficiency of not doing the range proofs. To answer the question, the two-party case was started by McKenzie and Ryder, and some of their techniques found their way in all this dishonest majority protocols, and Yuda Lindell improved that Then there's a whole series of protocols, and this refers to the thing that I said at the beginning, which is that in a way, the protocol that I just presented there they're just using traditional MPC tools that are tailored to the computational DSA's function. So this should be there. Are other ways? There are other ways to do MPC, to do DSA, and you can use, for example, precomputational Beaver triplets to speed up the computation of DSA. And here there is some papers that do exactly that. And then the last reference is this work by Darmagard et al. That assumes honest majority, but assumes also aborts. And in this case, by using this trade-off, they get better efficiency and round complexity than the aborts with dishonest majority. And also don't need a reliable process channel. If you need no protocol with dishonest majority requires a reliable process channel because they all have no fairness or termination guarantee, so you can do without it. But if you want a robust and fair protocol, you would need to have a process channel, and that's the reference. Okay, so now I'm going to start another topic, and I have about 10 minutes, so I'll start it, and then maybe tomorrow we'll revisit it. So if there are no questions about threshold DSA, I want to move to a different way of proving security. So let's revisit how we have proved security so far. We have proved security by unforgeability by simulation. We assume that the adversary can forge only when controlling T players. We get a simulator that wants to forge the centralized key. The simulator gets a public key, and then it simulates a distributed key generation for the network that hits the specific public key. To do that, it must not know at least one honest party secret key, right? Otherwise, it would know the secret keys of everybody and the secret key corresponding to PK. And then when the message comes, it gets a signature from a centralized oracle, and somehow it simulates an execution of the protocol that hits that particular S. Once we do that, we have a threshold scheme which is as secure as the centralized one. Okay, this is great because we're basing the security of the threshold scheme on the security of the centralized one. There's nothing that the adversary can do in the threshold scheme that it couldn't do in the centralized one. But there is another strategy, right? The other strategy would be, think about Schnorr. So for Schnorr, we know that an adversary that forged, for an adversary that forged Schnorr, there is a reduction that is able to compute discrete logs. How? So by the way, this should be Z. The reduction gets Z, which is a target group element, and it needs to compute U, right? And then in this reduction, it presents a public key to the adversary, it plays the CMA game. When the adversary forged, somehow the reduction is able to extract U, okay? So the whole magic of the reduction is how do you embed Z, again, this should be Z, into this reduction, and now you extract U from the forgery, okay? Well, I want to note that one little dirty, not so secret fact about DSA is that we do not have any such reduction for DSA. We use DSA, we assume it's secure, but we have no known reduction that DSA forging DSA is equivalent to the computation of Discrete log. So, and if any of you is looking for an open problem, there it is. I mean, but this is obviously a very difficult one because we've been looking at this scheme for close to 30 years and no such reduction is known. Okay, so maybe we can do this even in a threshold scheme, right? So let's assume that the adversary can forge only controlling T players. Now, instead of simulating with a centralized scheme, what I want to do is, again, this would be Z right here. I want to build a reduction that, given Z, a group element, wants to compute U. Now, this reduction is going to run our network with a bunch of players simulated by the reduction. And this reduction, this is going to run on some public key. Notice that there is no public key to match here, okay? And that M, you get M, and the reduction somehow uses whatever reduction we know for the signature scheme to produce a signature. And then when the adversary forges, we use the reduction to compute U. Notice that if we do this, all of a sudden, we don't have to hit a specific public key. And we don't have to hit a specific signature S. What we need to do is to be able to embed our challenge Z into the public key, into the signature protocols, and into the forgery, okay? If we're able to do that, then we have a proof of unforgeability by reduction to a hard problem, okay? Do you see the difference, right? The difference is in one, we're doing a reduction to the unforgeability of the centralized scheme. Here I'm doing a reduction to a computationally hard problem, in this case, Discrete log. This frees me from the need to hit particular public keys and particular signatures during the simulation, but with the trade-off that I need to be able to embed my challenge in those transcripts. Okay? That's what I just said. Don't have to hit a specific value, but be able to embed the challenge. So let's go back to Pedersen DKG. So remember, the Pedersen DKG is a joint parallel execution of Feldman VSS or random values. Maybe it is sufficient for a proof by reduction, but unfortunately not for DSA, because for DSA we don't even have a reduction for the centralized case, right? So for DSA, there's nothing we can do. But maybe for Schnorr or other schemes, maybe we're able to embed a specific Discrete log challenge into the DKG in a way that we can extract the solution from the forgery, and then we can prove that the scheme is secure, okay? Note that this is a weaker statement about the security of the protocol. We're not simulating the protocol perfectly. We're just guaranteeing that we can create transcript that embed a challenge. And in fact, this could then not come up as an issue if we're doing arbitrary compositions. But let's put that aside for a minute. And this is what we're going to try to do. And I mean, how much time do I have left? Or is this a good time to stop?
About, let's say, 20 minutes.
20 more minutes? Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay. So let's see. So, and this is actually something that we did when we figure out that the Pedersen DKG was not simulatable in the terms of hitting a particular value, what we realized was that still the instances that were generated by Pedersen DKG were still kind of hard instances, meaning the adversary should not be able to compute the discrete log of what comes out of the DKG, okay? And the reason is that at the end of the DKG, the secret key is a value X, which is a contribution of the honest players and a contribution of the corrupted players. And yes, the corrupted players' contribution may be related to the honest contribution. This is why the adversary can bias the resulting key and prevent a full simulation from happening, right? And that's because Feldman's VSS is somewhat malleable. Now, let's assume honest majority for a minute, okay? Then if we assume an honest majority, the contribution of the corrupted players is known to the reduction. Why? Because if you assume an honest majority, the reduction, the simulator, controls the majority of the players. And therefore, it has a majority of the shares, which will allow it to know what the contribution of the adversary is. This will allow the reduction to embed the challenge in the contribution of one of the honest players. Let me specify more precisely what's going on. So what I mean by simplified Schnorr, I mean the Schnorr that during the, the DKG is the basic Pedersen DKG, where everybody runs Feldman in parallel, and the generation of the nonce is also done through a Pedersen DKG, where everybody runs in parallel and Feldman VSS. So we have a reduction that runs on input Z, G to the U, and wants to compute U. So during the DKG, one player, one of the honest players in the reduction, okay, uses Z as their contribution for their Feldman VSS. That means, unfortunately, that they don't know U, right? So the reduction will simulate Feldman VSS for this player. Remember, we can simulate Feldman. What we cannot simulate is a parallel execution of Feldman, but we can simulate a single Feldman to hit a particular Z. Okay, so what is the resulting secret key? The resulting secret key is U plus the contribution of the other honest players, which the reduction knows because it's going to choose them at random, like normally, and the reduction of the contribution of the corrupted ones, which, as I said, they're known to the reduction because we are assuming honest majority. So the adversary has shared them with everybody, and so the majority of players can reconstruct. So now you can adapt the standard reduction for the centralized Schnorr to the distributed case. Meaning what? When the adversary queries a message M, use the regular Schnorr reduction to produce valid partial signatures for the players who use Z. Remember that the partial signature looked like local Schnorr signatures for the local public key of the player and so on, right? So we have a way which uses the programmability of the random oracle in the Schnorr signature scheme to, during a chosen message attack simulation, to sign even if we don't know the discrete log. And so we're going to do that for the one player in the reduction that we don't know the discrete log, the player that uses Z. For the other ones, we know the discrete log, so we can do it, right? And the adversary does whatever he wants. Now, when the adversary produces the forgery, again, we have a regular Schnorr reduction that will give us the secret key, X, right? But now, if we know X, remember the reduction knows XH, knows XC, and so it can get U. Any questions?
So far, there are no questions.
Okay. So this is, again, this is a paper that we did a long time ago when we realized. So at the end, what we did say was, okay, if you want simulation, you have to do this joint Pedersen DKG. And unfortunately for DSA, you have to do that. And if you want to do Schnorr, you can do regular Pedersen because it's enough if you have a reduction to a specific R problem. By the way, we just did Schnorr, and we didn't really tease out what properties of the DKG, what formal properties of the DKG you need to make sure that this proof by reduction works, right? So for the proof by simulatability, we have very clear properties that we need for the DKG. Here we said, oh, you generate these R distances and it works, but it somehow, it would have been nice if we had written down exactly what properties of the DKG you need and what properties of the hard problem you need that makes this all work. And there's a very nice paper at the last Eurocrit last year by Gurkhan, and I will actually mention it later, which does exactly that. It's one of the results in the paper. There's another result. They actually formalize the notion that the actual properties of the DKG that you need to make this work. The reference will come in the next slides. So, okay, so this is how you do Schnorr. And the state of the art for Schnorr is a scheme called Frost, which has two major improvements over the previous Schnorr scheme that I described. The first one is that it assumed dishonest majority. Okay, that one that I showed you assumed honest majority that gives you robustness and all that. So it assumed dishonest majority, so it works with a board. Now, the problem with assuming dishonest majority is that at the end of the DKG, the secret key is still the sum of the contribution of the honest players and the contribution of the dishonest players. But now, because it's dishonest majority, we can't assume that the reduction has enough players to reconstruct the contribution of the bad players, right? So what they do, they modify Pedersen DKG so that each party provides a proof of knowledge of their contribution. Now, funny enough, they use a Schnorr identification proof of knowledge of Discrete log to do that. And then this proof of knowledge, they do it non-interactively in the random oracle model, whatever. The basic point that will make the contribution of the honest or the dishonest players available to the reduction, which then will allow the reduction to go through. From the forgery, you get X, and because you know XC, you know XH, and in XH, you're going to embed your challenge. And the other nice advantage of Schnorr is that they use a different idea to generate nonces. Instead of running a DKG, which would be too expensive to do, well, it's okay to run a DKG once to do the key, they use a different idea to generate nonces. Well, the first idea is to move again to this additive sharing. Again, once you have dishonest majority and abort, you can move from the T out of N sharing to the additive sharing to T plus 1, T plus 1. And if it happens that the adversary wants to stop you, you abort, right? You're not guaranteed that you have enough good players in there, but you're okay with abort. And once you move to this additive sharing, they prepare lots of additive sharing EI and DI, which are going to be used to sign. And the nonce, the most simple idea would be what we do in the other DSA paper, would be to just use EI as the nonce. But they do this interesting linear combination of mixing of two nonces with a value which is dependent on the message and the subset of players, which really binds the nonces to the message and the set of players signing, which makes them really effectively random across all executions. And this prevents an attack that allows an adversary to somehow open several concurrent sessions at once and sort of play with the nonces if by using them by partitioning the set of players and using this, somehow making the same nonce appear in the two sets, which would be bad because then you have the same nonce using two signatures, which would then leak the key. And by the way, these concurrent attacks are somehow ruled out in the model of the previous Schnorr because we only proved that in kind of the sequential is very limited concurrency. So I think this is a good place to stop. Tomorrow I'm going to talk a little more about DKG and open problems.
Okay, thank you very much, Rosario, for two great talks. We will resume tomorrow, and we will also see you tomorrow for two more sessions. Thank you very much for all the speakers for this day, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you.